Every week on Cyberwork, listeners ask us the same question. What cybersecurity skills should I learn? Well, try this. Go to infosecinstitute.com/free to get your free cybersecurity talent development ebook. It's got in-depth training plans for the 12 most common roles, including SOC analyst, penetration tester, cloud security engineer, information risk analyst, privacy manager, secure coder, and more. We took notes from employees and a team of subject matter experts to build training plans that align with the most in-demand skills. You can use the plans as is or customize them to create a unique training plan that aligns with your own unique career goals. One more time, just go to infosecinstitute.com/free or click the link in the description to get your free training plans, plus many more free resources for Cyberwork listeners. Do it. infosecinstitute.com/free. Now, on with the show. Today on Cyberwork, Noriswadi Ismail of Breakwater Solutions and the Humanising 2030 campaign joins us to talk about privacy as it pertains both to international business and cybersecurity, and why it's important not just to learn about certification variants from continent to continent, but also the cultural variants that shape them. And via the Humanising 2030 campaign, Noris and colleagues hope to bring a more ethical and diverse approach to programming and guiding AI in the decade to come. This is a heady conversation, folks, so get ready to dig deep into the critical issues of our time. Today on Cyberwork. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. Each week, we talk with a different industry thought leader about cybersecurity trends, the way those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, while offering tips for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. Noriswadi Ismail leads Breakwater's global data privacy practice. He's an expert on how data privacy and cybersecurity interact, and he is a subject matter expert on global data privacy laws and regulations, data privacy and security strategies, and data privacy technology. Noris is a frequent author and guest speaker in global data privacy and an active member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals, IAPP for short. Prior to Breakwater, he was a managing director at Ankara and led GDPR consulting for EY UK. Noris has degrees and certificates from multiple universities, including doctoral research at Brunel Law School. He is a certified information privacy professional, Asia, CIPPA, and has a practitioner certificate in data protection, PC.TP. Noris, thank you for joining me today. Welcome to Cyberwork.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me here. Hello from London.
Very, very good to have you. Very good to have you from another continent here. So to start with, I'd like to get to know our guests a little bit by tracing their interests. So where did you first get interested in computers and tech, and what specifically drove you to, or drew you to privacy as a career interest?
I think it's a very fundamental memorial in question, Chris, because it took me like 25 years ago, where I studied law. And even prior to the law school, I was exposed with quite a number of technology kind of subjects, which I thought that starting with patent, because when you look into the patent, there's about technology, about invention, about novelty. So one of the things that really, really intrigued at the time was about software patent. And that actually led me to more future inquisitiveness, and I reached out to my professor. I said, what do you think about the future of IT law and data law? And she said, this is something that you really want to actually explore, and you have to start from now. So I think since then, I never turned back. There's no U-turn. And I developed the passion in IT law, telecommunications law during the law school. So when I entered to the career world, being a lawyer, I was involved with lots of IT technology matters, technology contracts, data center contracts. And at the time, it was mainframe. That was before. Of course, and there's lots of very sophisticated, kind of network security matters, which involve a lot of, I would say, practical kind of approach. And every day at a time was learning day. And until today, Chris, because technology evolves, technology changes, and it's very, very interesting to see how it's like in evolution. And I never turned back since then.
Yeah, I imagine that there was a lot more of a emphasis on sort of the physical aspects of the data security with the sort of, like you said, the in-house mainframes and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because on the other hand, there's the physical security aspect. On the other hand, there's also the virtual security. And there's also in between where most of the stakeholders globally, irrespective of region, really need to understand the local nuance, the regional nuance, and the cultural nuance as well.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the exposure comes into the picture whenever involved with a number of conversation with regulators, with multinational organizations, even with consumers, even with my peers. There are quite a number of sophisticated areas that the law couldn't address. Yes, the law is law, okay, black and white, okay, whether it's a good law or bad law, again, it depends on the risk, how exactly the risk lens, is, how exactly the risk posture is, and how exactly the risk driver is.
Yeah, I want to just pause to sort of address our listeners, break the fourth wall a little bit. But another one of our UK podcast friends and authors, Susan Morrow, had a similar story. She got into cybersecurity because she was originally in chemistry, and she found that she liked learning about securing her findings on the website more than she liked actually doing the findings. And here you're saying, you started out in patent law, and then you found that you liked the sort of like privacy intersections of that. So I think just as a word of wisdom to our listeners, if you're doing something else completely and something just catches your interest out of the corner of your eye, like, don't be afraid to like pounce on it, and you might well become the sort of master of a domain that hasn't even been claimed yet. Yeah. So to move on a little bit, could you talk about some of the formative projects, positions, experiences, and lessons that put you on the path from your early days, in patent law and studying telecommunications towards this shift toward privacy? So you mentioned, obviously that you saw this opportunity here, but what were some of the sort of big projects that turned you into a subject matter expert in this field?
I think that's a very, very good question. And my foundation when it comes to technology contracts and technology negotiation involved with the big boys, the big guys, at the time, like Google, Microsoft, IBM, and even Cisco, because whenever I actually reviewed the contracts, I was like, wow, there are a lot of things that, I need to learn being a lawyer, in-house lawyer at the time. So it's a huge learning curve for the first 5 to 10 years in my career, where at the time, when I was in Asia, the data protection, the privacy law was not there yet. And we had to refer to the EU directive, which is the EU-based kind of directive, which is now, the predecessor of the GDPR. Right. And we dealt a lot about, how exactly you need to deal with data, not only from the physical perspective, but also the virtual perspective. So there's one aspect of it in terms of the contractual negotiations, and as well as, dealing with the big players and multinational as well. And then on the other hand, throughout my career, during the first 10 years of being an in-house lawyer or a general counsel for a system integrator company, we also dealt with lots of public sector contracts, where most of the public sector contracts, they wanted to ensure that, vendors or providers can really comply with whatever strict requirements, like box ticking exercise. But in reality, I asked the exact question, to the project managers and project directors, can you really deliver this? It's quite, over-ambitious. And of course, because of the relationship, the answer is yes. But in reality, when you deliver the project, there are, of course, a lot of many challenges because it's quite new. And then both stakeholders really learn throughout the process. And it's actually the beauty of, when it comes to technology project or technology implementation, Chris, because on the one hand, you can see how exactly the law intersect with risks. You can see how the law intersect with technology, and you can see how exactly law also intersect with other sophistication of other aspects of law, like taxation, like, HR, or even like corporate commercials, mergers and acquisition, or even, other areas of law that really require certain clarity. So I would say that the first 5 to 10 years of my career really shaped the foundation. There are 3 things that I learned throughout, those years, Chris. The first is mastering the principles. Even though you're not a lawyer, if let's say you are a computer science student or IT background student, or even engineering, or even, social science or history, geography, it doesn't matter, what your background is. Mastering the principles are important, and mastering the data taxonomy is important. So that's the first. When you understand the principles and on foundation, the definition, it will remain forever. It doesn't matter what the law is, right? Whether it's GDPR or whether it's CCPA, CRA in California or even, elsewhere around the world. Second is how exactly, these principles can be tweaked and can be actually contextualized within a sector environment. Because there are many sectors, data-driven sector and non-data-driven sectors. So when you deal with regulated sectors like financial services or healthcare or telecommunications, media, technology, of course, these are like the bulk where the data is being processed. And this is where you have to go back to basic by asking, the 1H4W kind of approach, the how, what, why, when, and who. Go back to basic. And from there, you're able to articulate the third point, which is a key takeaway that I learned throughout the first 10 years of my career is, what are the challenges? What are the pain points? And how exactly I can help to ensure that you minimize the risk, or I help to be part of that, risk minimization conversation, whether it is a data risk issue, whether it's a technology implementation issue, or whether it is also something which is intersect between data privacy, cybersecurity, and data governance.
Yeah, that's that's a whole lot right there. I mean, we could probably break off onto any of those three sort of paths and do a whole episode about that. So we might have to have you as a return guest. But yeah, especially I'm interested in sort of, as you said, the intersection between the black and white of the law and the risk and I think that's really fascinating. But for now, I want to talk to you a little bit about your current career. So can you talk about your work as managing director at Breakwater Solutions? What are some of the common tasks, day-to-day responsibilities, and what does an average day look like in this role?
Well, so I kicked off my day at 5:30 in the morning. Of course, it's not just about work. So I started with, meditation, and I started with prayers, and I started with like having that kind of breathing, inhale and exhale kind of technique. I think it's important. Yeah. Breathing is important for the first day of the day. It depends on where you are. It doesn't matter if you're in London or New York or elsewhere. And then typically in my day-to-day or my daily activities involve five matters. The first is in terms of helping the organization and clients to really help to improve, the current pain points when it comes to data protection and privacy, current state of maturity, implementation, and privacy technology, improvement program. And then second, listening. And as a practitioner, I have to listen. At times, what I learned a lot throughout, being a lawyer during those years is that we like to talk, but we actually, have to pause and listen. So that listening exercise is important as part of my daily role. And I would say that I would just like allocate between 2-3 hours to listen, from my peers and from, the market and from regulators and even from practitioners, that I've known in the market and clients, right? Okay, what exactly, they would like to update in terms of their priorities are. And the third is to actually really being a thought leader to ensure that helping organizations to really move, to the next level in terms of what they want to aspire and achieve in the current environment, in the current program. And this is important, Chris, because globally, whether you are in the US or in London or in Europe or in Asia or Middle East, that kind of, integration and as well as connecting, the dots, is important. And my role is actually to ensure that everyone is aligned in terms of managing expectations, not only from the technology, delivery perspective, not only from the thought leadership perspective, but also, simplifying the narratives to ensure that, everyone is on the same page in terms of what, we need to achieve. And the fourth, my day-to-day routine is, looking into the people matters, people and culture matters, because for me, diversity, equity, inclusion is the top on the agenda. As part of the delivery team and as part of the top leaders, together with our colleagues in Breakwaters and practitioners, or even with our stakeholders globally, regulators, clients, the DEI is actually an important element, and it's actually part of the conversation that should not be overlooked. Whenever you discuss or whenever you argue, whenever you debate or whenever you dissent on certain areas, or even when you pop suggestions, so that there's no unconscious, even conscious bias, from certain lens of perspective. And the last but not least, Chris, is more about like reprioritizing and prioritizing, the proposals and as well as other kind of engagement, so that there's a focused time to be met and to be achieved. Within my 5 days, I actually put like Wednesdays and Friday for my focus time to do it. Right, because it's important for you to like get things done and to ensure that it's productive, based on what exactly you achieve or that I want to aspire to achieve within a particular day or week. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've implemented Focus Friday at our office as well, and it's stunningly helpful in terms of having an unbroken amount of time to like think the big thoughts and so forth. So, what I like about that too is, I asked that question just about everybody. What's your day-to-day routine like, or what are your common tasks? And we, the two answers we usually get are either, well, it's different from day to day, or they just go into, well, first I check my email and then I do this. But like, I like that your work week is sorted by 5 principles. So like, you're not thinking in terms of like, I got to get this done, but like you're thinking in the larger sense of like, these are, I mean, I've never heard, someone more accurately say I steered the ship than what you just did there. So very, very impressive. Thank you. So some of our regular listeners will likely remember the episode of CyberWorks Live we hosted earlier this year, a couple months ago, called A Public Discussion About Privacy Careers. We have had several episodes from one of Infosec's instructors, Chris Stevens, about privacy and its various certifications around the world. So Infosec tends to connect privacy and cybersecurity quite closely as career tracks and work objectives. And we do our best to prepare new professionals for roles in either or both areas of expertise. So what do you think the state of international privacy is like right now, Norris, as it pertains to how cybersecurity and risk plans are being formulated, especially with multinational organizations?
That is a very, very simple answer, but hard to a simple question, but not answer. Should I rephrase that way? Right. If you look at 20 years back, Chris, and the wider listeners and audience, right, the data privacy law is very like a patchwork because, the US with the sectoral law, prior to the current evolution in the 50 states in the US, even at the federal level. And at the time, the EU has its own directive, 95/460 directive. And there are quite a number of sector-specific laws outside the EU or outside the US, which actually really govern and regulate, the data processing activities, mostly financial services, kind of sector. And since then, we're seeing the evolution of international data privacy framework or regulation evolved, and in a way, it improves by leaps and bounds. I think partly because how GDPR actually has influenced, the other non-EU landscape and legislation to review their current, activities. So that's one lens. Another lens that I've viewed, Chris, is that having observed and having engaged and having listened to, and also having like understood what exactly the stakeholders concerned from the Eastern side and the Western side and the Middle Eastern side, there's also certain cultural and as well as regional nuances and differences. Because I think one thing that some of the principals really need to think about is that to look into more from the cultural perspective as well. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And I would say that because of the GDPR regulation framework, it has actually given a much more gradual shift for outside the EU to really improve the current framework. Even though currently GDPR is undergoing the GDPR 2.0, they call it, to review and to actually look into what exactly that they have done right and what exactly they have done a little bit wrong, but what they can have done better.
Yeah, and a lot of things that they didn't really know were going to happen at the time. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah. So I think that's worth noting too, because we've, obviously we're very sort of certification based in terms of being a training academy and so forth. But, when we talk about the different IAPP certifications for different parts of the world, I want to make sure that people are not thinking just in terms of like, okay, well, I just need to know which of the checkboxes applies to Asia, which ones apply to Canada, which ones apply to Europe, in terms of like, I just have to keep them separate in my head. But I think going through the framework of also the cultural differences that inform those privacy variants. Now, do you have a sense, do you feel like the IAPP certifications accurately sort of prepare people in studying for those certifications for the cultural variants, or is that something you had to kind of learn on your own?
I really like that question, Chris. I might be very biased because I'm formerly, sit as one of the IAPP Asia Advisory Board member, and I'm currently also an active member of IAPP European Advisory Board for 2022 and 2023, and we're very, very well, understood what exactly how exactly the market demand is and the market feedback as well, and it is very, very challenging for during those early years. As part of certification kind of planning to look into, should we cover some of the jurisdictions that have the laws, or should we cover the jurisdictions that have certain maturity in terms of the enforcement, or depending on how the regulators actually really enforce, the law. I think as far as the certification is concerned that has been introduced by IAPP, I would say that it would be the model of certification where any student or any professionals who wants to upskill, doesn't matter, you have a cybersecurity background or data governance background, it depends on the level of upskilling. I would say that there are three, certification that you can, really look into. If let's say you don't have a legal background, start with CIPM, which is more from the management side of things, how to do it, right? It's more about how to do and how to operationalize a privacy program. Right. If let's say you have a CIPT, you have a very strong cybersecurity background, but you want to specialize much more towards a more regulatory focused kind of certification, you might want to explore CIPPE for Europe, or A, for Asia, or C for Canada, and as well as other jurisdictions, that IPP actually has outlined in a certification program. And if let's say you want to have a much more in between, privacy engineering, kind of lens, and to upskill yourself, you might want to consider CIPT, which is more for the technology side of things. Yes. And it's actually beautiful because you can have the options and to choose, but importantly, consult, those who've actually have undergone that certification, and also, most of them will be able to give the relevant feedback. But importantly, I always tell aspiring privacy leaders, aspiring or future privacy leaders, that certification is not a big license for you to be a specialist. Right. It's actually the experience. So yes, certification is good, but once you're involved with the project, once you're involved with the right, exact implementation, not only from the privacy engineering perspective, not only from the regulatory perspective, like for GDPR, or even Asia, or even Canada, or even America, but you are involved in a very specific, sophisticated project, then your upskilling towards certification is much more accelerated. Again, it depends on the exposure, it depends on the mentoring, and also it depends on the how exactly you want to envision to upskill yourself in this IAPP certification. But in short, to answer your question, it's a very good certification, and highly encourage anyone who wants to upskill to sit for this exam.
So speaking to what you said there, that it doesn't necessarily confer upon you instant expertise, but it's a good upskilling method. Do you recommend, if you're just getting started in the industry or want to put your foot in the door, do you start with the certification and use that knowledge as a baseline to get your first experience, or does it make more sense to get your first experience and then upskill when you feel yourself your natural abilities sort of hitting the wall?
All of the question and reflection, Chris. I think there are two strategies, for candidates, for talents, to do this. If I were to be a candidate who doesn't have a legal background, or assuming that, a cybersecurity background, or even HR or marketing, but I would like to get involved with my first data privacy project, right? So I will invest my time to do a pro bono, to offer myself to get involved with small project for charity, or for, charity which has an app and they process personal data. And then when you start with a small project, and at the same time, in parallel, seek the certification. And you could see the relevance, some of the principles, and also the project that you're involved, assuming that, you will get that opportunity by a particular charity, or, by way of pro bono. So there's one, scenario that a candidate might want to actually explore. Another scenario is assuming that you are already in the, compliance department, or cybersecurity department, or HR department, or marketing department. Again, it depends on, the governance structure of your organization, whether it's centralized, decentralized, or hybrid. It's good to actually think about data on a day-to-day basis when you perform, your function. Even though it's monotonous, but there's always data risk there. So, and then get involved with certain, data privacy, activities, being a privacy champion, being a security champion, and then start to link which certification might be relevant, for you as part of your career progress. I would say that two lenses are actually I would say the tactical and the strategic approach, and importantly, get that buy-in, from your line manager, get the buy-in from the wider stakeholders to ensure that they really support the career growth and aspiration. But assuming that you are you are not attached to your organization, but you are an entrepreneur, or you are like a developer, or you are a coder, there's no harm for you to start consider this application as well, because it's important, because every single second we deal with data. And there's all this risk there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And and just to put a button on that, don't feel like you have to make this decision on your own. Like you said, talk to your supervisors and talk to your team and see what they need from you. And your path might make more sense, than you realized. So I was originally planning on talking about privacy and security for this whole episode. And clearly we would have enough material to do 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 episodes. But I went over to your website, noriswadiismail.com, and I noticed a section for something called Humanising 2030. And it really kind of intrigued me a lot. So I hope you don't mind talking more about it with me. So to get started, what are the objectives of Humanizing 2030? It's very exciting, but I have to say a very ambitious project considering how close we are to that year right now, about 8 years off here.
Yeah, Chris,
7.5 years.
Yeah, that's a very, I would say, I'm very impressed when you highlighted that Humanizing 2030, because the motivation or perhaps the inspiration, why I kicked off the Humanizing 2030 initiative, partly because when I was, in Oxford Side Business School, at the time it was during the pandemic, I attended the Oxford Scenarios program, Side Business School in the University of Oxford. Yes. So one of the modules is about future prediction. And at the time, I actually highlighted about, all right, are we going to be more human when the robot will take over the role or at the tasks and activities, so to speak? The robot will take over 100% of the tasks, or the robot will actually automate everything what we do, and there will be a much more lesser kind of human interaction. And then the question is, where exactly, that kind of conscious and unconscious, bias, are or is, and to what extent that, we need to deal with this kind of psychological, kind of element whenever there's a human involvement and intervention, throughout the workflow or throughout the process. Doesn't matter, in an app environment, system environment, and as well as, a large scale automated environment, depending upon what exactly the sector of the business is in the future. So one of the inspiration is actually from Professor Richard Susskind, where he highlighted in his book, he's a great, inspirational leader, professor and consultant that actually advocated about AI. And one of his, hypothesis, which is happening today, is, the technology, the robot will take over, the human activities. So Humanizing 2030 is about addressing some of these gaps. And understanding why these gaps are not actually addressed, leading to 2030, and to what extent that different geographies and different stakeholders really need to understand there's a cultural nuance, there's a regional nuance, and there's also, the coders, because who actually designed the algorithm is human being. It's predetermined. Yes. Okay. To what extent that the coders actually design it is based on certain instruction, certain workflow. Who is actually the brainchild behind it is human being, human being. So that kind of diversity, equity, inclusion from the bias, lens perspective, in my view, needs to be really discussed and to be unveiled, and still, work in progress. So Humanizing 2030 is not just about addressing this, Chris, it's also looking into certain multidisciplinary areas that I think that we human being, we definitely still be relevant and prevalent. Yep. Doesn't matter whether the robot will take over 60% or 30% or even 70% of the work, but there should be an element of human involvement towards the improvement of that particular AI environment. And it's still a work in progress, by other jurisdictions around the world as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So I want to start by talking about AI bias and geopolitical impact. So I mean, I've talked to past guests about several examples of AI bias, whether it's face recognition technology that recognizes white skin and being improperly created to approach non-white skin tones, or texts that don't deal with non-standardized language constructions, et cetera. So can you give me some more examples of current AI bias and the ways that this project is working to untie these knots and make AI-based projects more ethical?
Sure. Coming from a BAME background, I could see that there's also certain bias in terms of pronunciation. There's also bias in terms of expression. There's also bias in terms of the articulation. There's also bias in terms of even looking into the observation and how you construct certain sentences, assuming that you are not a native Caucasian. And right. I think that this is actually what we are seeing and observing today as a BAME. And I think that there's still a lot of work to be done in this space. And governments around the world, especially the Western government, think that all right, this is just a nice to have, not must to have. The answer is no, because you want to be very inclusive, you want to have a very much diverse, culture. You have to look into beyond than the skin. You have to look into the neuroscience of diversity rather than a particular, aspect or label, within a particular D&I lens. And I think there's quite a number of efforts, from, the UK government on this matter, and as well as, certain parts in the US and certain parts in Europe, like the Netherlands, or also in France and in Germany, and it's still a very delicate, kind of debate, Chris, because there's always, that kind of conscious and unconscious bias whenever we actually want to design something. And then I think going back to your question, in short, I would say there are two things that, stakeholders really need to rethink and re-strategize. The first is never think that, that kind of bias, should be by default, that everyone should actually follow that. And then second, there is lots of data set that can support that, because the more data set or the more diverse data set, that is even better towards, particular, organization or particular mission that you want to achieve in terms of what you want to achieve using AI. And of course, when we talk about AI, it's not just about try to humanize AI or try to make it more diverse from the DEI lens, but also understanding the risk as well, the data behind it, because there's also sensitive personal data that might be triggered by or being processed, assuming that you are processing sensitive personal data, beyond that, the white skin, as you mentioned a while ago, and it's still working right, Chris.
Right. Or the way people are using technology, if there's physical disabilities or neurodiversity involved, not everyone is using, the same hotkeys or, taking things the long way around or whatever. So there's so many different points of interrogation that I think are really well served by this initiative. So one of the objectives of Humanizing 2030 is understanding when diversity inclusion is being overlooked and compromised. So, you're talking about that already, and that's a topic we like to talk about a lot here at Cyberwork. And it's not just a nice idea, but an absolute necessity as future security issues will become more complex and need a wider variety of skills, experiences, background, life histories. So, we talked about the importance of this already. Can you talk about some of the specific strategies that you have in mind to make diversity and inclusion less of a thing, that you listen to about on a yearly video for a half hour and get your certificate and forget about, and more of an organizing principle for your company?
I like that question, Chris. In my view, I think I would like to be very honest when it comes to this topic, Chris, and wider listeners. It starts from home, it starts from the family, and then from there, you can actually really gradually build the DEI in a work environment. And then you can also expand that, in a market, with stakeholders that you're dealing with your peers, with, stakeholders or partners that you are dealing with. And this is actually where, it needs to be started or kicked off. But in reality, what we're seeing in the market doesn't matter whether it's in Europe, US, the UK, or even in Asia. This is more like, we need to do this like a box ticking exercise rather than having that very strong tone from the leadership and cascade it, to the wider employees and members of staff, even to vendors when it comes to DEI conversation or DEI agenda. So there's actually one angle that we need to think about, to be better. And then the second is in relation to how the DEI should be balanced with the mission and vision of growth of the company. And at the same time, from the data risk perspective, it should not actually be biased in a certain specific data set, and it should be quite inclusive in the sense that have we taken into consideration, right, the data set outside the US or the data set outside Europe or even data set in Asia or even in the Middle East, assuming that you're dealing with global stakeholders, having global employees in terms of, the D&I. So I think that kind of teams, need to be actually really, I would say established as fundamental. And once you have established that, then it's important to really dissect and cherry pick which one that we need to focus and which one we need to prioritize and which one or which data set that we need to really observe and understand and learn and even listen, from the wider stakeholders so that there is actually a workable plan, to really resonate with the strategy. Yeah.
Okay, so to take that to the organizational level, Norris, for organizations that want to create a more diverse and inclusive workspace and for our purpose, a security team, but claim that, quote, we just don't get diverse candidates applying, what are your ideas and strategies to make sure that your hiring team is looking in all the right places and not, say, using, for example, AI resume software to intentionally or unintentionally filter out candidates who don't adhere to certain narrow sets of requirements?
That is actually an ongoing challenge, Chris, in terms of the recruitment, onboarding. Sure. Even if you ask me, you should actually reach out to this person because this person worked with me, many years with a client, and that is bias. And I have actually experienced that many, many times, but I actually paused for a while and said, no, I should not do this. It should be a very objective exercise. So when we look into the AI, kind of intervention in this process. So again, it has to be very realistic, very, very objective by taking into account variety of data set. And I think quite a number of global organizations have started to really, kick off, a blind CV review by not putting names, encourage candidates not to put the surname, first name and second name, or not to put the postcode, because when you put the postcode of a particular location, and prospective employer will say, oh, you actually originated or come from quite a low income background. That actually will towards that kind of bias even at the screening stage.
Yes.
And we also, try to look into an area where, CVs, doesn't mean that you graduated from Harvard or Yale or Ivy League or Oxbridge, or even, the top 100 universities, you will be admitted as the favorite, kind of applicants. And we human beings, we like that, right? Oh, you graduated from Harvard. Okay, come on. Okay, you need
interview. We got a Harvard person on our team.
That kind of process. We just want to see, how exactly your soft skill or your emotional quotients, emotional intelligence, can really value, the current, organization to be part, of the growth. But of course, it's easy to say than done or to do it, but it's still work in progress. Even Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, and the top 100 companies in the world, especially from the people and culture perspective, they are taking a much more a hybrid approach, a combination of AI and human, kind of, interaction, and maybe, very much learning what they have done wrong and improve it better on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So thank you for that. That was very good. Very good response. Now we're coming up on the end of time here, but I really want to, before we start to wrap, I want to talk, is there anything else about Humanizing 2030 that, we've sort of covered a very narrow range of it, but I want to at least leave our listeners with sort of an overarching sense of all of the goals of Humanizing 2030. Can you talk briefly about some of the other aspects of the project that we haven't covered so far, and also what some of the sort of concrete plans are to actualize some of these things?
Sure. There are three activities that Humanizing 2030 aim to achieve. The first is we would like to look into the top 100 apps applications in the world, okay, where existing applications have certain element of bias in terms of the way they actually like profile data and processing personal data. And if there's element of unconscious bias and both conscious bias, which is not easy, to identify because it requires a lot of analysis, from that. So that's the first. The second is looking into the geography and also the culture as well, because each of this geography and culture has different understanding about diversity. Each of the geography has a different understanding about inclusivity. Yep. And each of this geography has a different understanding about even very basic, kind of impression about DEI, for example. So that's the second bit, more from the psychological and as well as neurodiversity science perspective. And this is where, those who really want to get involved, volunteers, whether you are existing professionals or data doctoral researchers or even students, who would like to be part of this, feel free to reach out to me on that. And the third element that we're looking into is what is actually the data risk when you do this. When I talk about data risk means there's element of cybersecurity impact on that when you process the data in the current apps. There's also an element of privacy risk as well. And there's also an element of data governance as well, in the context of, these apps. So when I say shortlisting the 100 app, it doesn't mean that we would like to see the fault or to actually like tell, these app providers that this is wrong, you should improve it. No, we just want to see, the current approach and the current, kind of level of understanding and how they really view this in the current environment. And of course, by 2030, of course, we have 8 years, Chris, to achieve that. There'll be lots of changes as well as we tweak and as we learn throughout the process. And I think the end goal, Chris, is to share with the wider stakeholders, with regulators, with organizations. And of course, I would like to actually develop this as part of a podcast, maybe a future podcast with you, Chris, and as well as a digital book, on this, perhaps 10 years,
So as we wrap up today, Norris, could you tell us more about Breakwater Solutions and some of the products or projects you're excited to talk about and work on in the months to come? And I guess to add to that, if people want to get involved with Humanizing 2030, how can they do that?
Sure. Breakwater is actually a global data risk management solutions. James is actually our leader, being a CEO, formerly IBM executive. And we have a range of products that really help to improve, automate, and ensure that there's level of productivity, versus cost. And then we have the consulting arm in which I am sitting within the global consulting practice being led by Rebecca Patterson, who is one of the co-founders in Breakwater and working very closely with Jim Vin as well, who is one of the co-founders, in Breakwater. So within the global consulting practice, we have global data privacy, cybersecurity, information governance, risk and compliance, investigations, and data analytics and strategy. So it's very holistic. It depends on what exactly the client pain points, the client challenges, and also what exactly the client wants, us to really help them, to approach, some of the ongoing issues or improvement within the organization, irrespective of where you are, whether you are in the US, UK, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. We're very global, we're very flexible, and we're very agile as well. So currently we're involved with quite a number of projects like analytics and as well as investigation and cybersecurity assessment and data privacy implementation. For example, data privacy technology implementation for clients in the US. And we also have certain projects, with clients in Middle East. And also other areas in the pipeline will be very much into the development of the Middle East and North Africa landscape, where we really want to help clients, to really ensure that they start the fundamentals right, and then they evolve it through improvement and towards the level of aspired maturity. So in short, we are a data risk management solutions. We want to actually help organizations, stakeholders, whether you're public sector or private sector, first to improve where you are today, and then to ensure that there's a cost effectiveness and efficiency in relation to your technology deployment. And third, the holisticness and as well as the level of, agnostic is actually a unique proposition. And again, we're not competing with other businesses like us, but we are more than happy to partner as long as we have the synergy, to achieve, the client expectation as well.
Nice. So regarding Humanizing 2030, is that something where you're looking for volunteers, or you're looking for kind of like people from other companies who you can partner with? Like how can people get involved with that if they want to?
Sure. We are looking for, towards, partnership, especially for those who really want to know more about Humanizing 2030 and volunteers, especially, from all continents around the world, US, UK, Europe, Asia, Middle East, because the more volunteers that are involved, the more inclusive, that Humanizing 2030 would be. And feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, Noriswadi Ismail. There's a LinkedIn profile there. And email me, noriswadi.ismail.breakwatersolutions.com. I'm reachable and contactable.
Wonderful. Well, Norris, thank you so much for your time and insights. This was an absolute joy to speak with you.
You're welcome, Chris. And thanks so much for having me here, and productive ahead and the remaining months of the year in 2022 and maybe advanced 2023 for all.
Absolutely. So as always, I'd like to thank all of you who are listening to and watching the Cyberwork podcast on, as I said, an unprecedented scale. In the last 3 months, you've helped us to more than double Cyberwork's viewership on YouTube. And for that, I'm thankful and humbled. So if you're subscribing, thank you. If you're watching when it goes live on Mondays at 1 p.m. Central, thank you again. And if you're telling friends and colleagues and sharing it around, thank you times 3. We're delighted to have you all along for the ride. So in wrapping up, every week on Cyberwork, listeners ask us the same question: what cybersecurity skills should I learn? So try this. Go to infosecinstitute.com/free to get your free cybersecurity talent development ebook. It's got in-depth training plans for the 12 most common roles, including SOC analyst, penetration tester, cloud security engineer, information risk analyst, privacy manager, secure coder, and more. We took notes from employers and a team of subject matter experts to build training plans that align with the most in-demand skills. You can use the plans as is or customize them to create unique training plans that align with your unique career goals. So once again, that's infosecinstitute.com/free, or click the link in the description below to get your free training plan, plus many more free resources for Cyberwork listeners. Do it. infosecinstitute.com/free. Thank you very much once again to Noriswadi Ismail and Breakwater Solutions and Humanizing 2030. And thank you all so much for watching and listening. We'll speak to you next week.